Jason X, Chapter 4. Had Rowan been conscious as they reached the surface and carried her to the landing area where the shuttle waited in pre-launch mode, she might have thought that she was already on another planet. The environment here bore no resemblance at all to the wooded campground that had once been known as Crystal Lake. There had been no trees here for over 3 centuries. The lake, too, was long gone, as was the topsoil, leaving a barren, desolate terrain continually scoured by the unceasing dust storms that blew at hurricane force. Possibly due to the centuries-long absence of human industry, the air was breathable, but only just, and only for very short periods of time, provided you didn't venture out into the open without a good filter over your nose and mouth. Otherwise, you'd find yourself with a double lungful of silicates. But at least it wasn't hard to find a place to land a shuttle, especially for a pilot as skilled as Lou Goddard. Legend had it that he had once touched down on a rock formation only a few inches wider around than this ship, solely for the sake of impressing a woman passenger he was interested in. Anyone who had ever met Lou found the story completely credible, especially the women, in spite of the fact that no one had ever managed to track down the particular woman who had inspired that particular neat trick. Lou himself wasn't talking, something which both thickened the plot and actually made it even more believable. At the moment, Lou was sitting comfortably in his custom-fitted pilot's seat, his ever-present leather cowboy hat tilted far back on his head as he watched the professor's little group on the console monitor struggling 500 yards through the punishing winds with 2 rather large burdens. Christ, it looked like they were carrying a couple of people on stretchers, he thought. Had he miscounted the number that had gone out this time, he wondered? Or had 2 of the students sneaked out after Lowe and the others had left? Seemed just like something that Stony What's-His-Name and that girl Kintsa would do. They were a couple of real wild ones, especially the girl, which meant it would also be just like them to get themselves hurt and have to be stretched back by the others, who were, in turn, probably cursing him for not setting down a couple of 100 yards closer. Naturally, it wouldn't do any good even to try to explain about the kind of terrain for an optimum landing zone, or reminding them that setting the shuttle down wasn't just a matter of getting good parking places. A light blinked on the console, letting him know that Lowe and his group had opened the hatch. A moment later, he heard the faint, tanky sound of their voices coming from the speaker to his right. Yeah, they were complaining about having to walk so far. The poor whittle kiddos, he thought. They sure had it tough. But at least he didn't have to rag on their pampered asses to buckle themselves into their safety harnesses so he could get them off this godforsaken rock. Behind him, the cockpit door slid open and Kicker came in. He plopped himself down in the co-pilot's seat, looking a hell of a lot more cheerful than he had when they had landed. "Are the doors secure?" Lou asked. "Locked and blocked," he said, grinning. "Beautiful," Lou said, and adjusted his cowboy hat so it sat more firmly. "Prepare for liftoff in 3, 2, and 1. The last word became a long, drawn-out, vibrating syllable as the engines roared into life. Clutching the yoke firmly with both hands, Lou could feel the shuttle begin to push away from the ground, shuddering mightily as it fought to counter the force of gravity. There was nothing Lou loved as much as flying, all kinds of flying, from faster-than-light to non-motorized gliding, including parasailing. But his absolute personal favorite was dirt-side liftoff, that sensation of rising up, pulling free of the restraining bonds of a whole world, and achieving escape velocity. Man, there was no other feeling that came close, at least not as far as Lou was concerned. "Oh yeah," he said, laughing with pleasure. "I love this part." From the corner of his eye, he saw Kicker still grinning at him like the cat who had gotten the cream. Or maybe the canary who had gotten the cat. He couldn't remember how it went. Eventually, the shuddering began to smooth out, and became the steady, increasing pressure of G-forces pushing him into the cushioned pilot's chair. This was a different kind of sensation. Not exactly pleasant, or not what most people would have called pleasant, but not really unpleasant either. It was just kind of odd, how it felt when you were just about to move beyond the limit of gravity's reach, just before you pulled free of the grip of an entire world. It always seemed to Lou that he could feel every cell in his body at that moment. Billions and billions of tiny sparks of life that added up to one live being that was himself. He thought of the sensation as both primal and mystical. Sensual mysticism. For Lou, this was what being a pilot was all about. which really made him wonder why the hell so many of his fellow pilots were always so damn grouchy, like they were wearing sandpaper underwear or something. Through the cockpit windshield, he could see the color of the sky darken dramatically. He took a slow, effortful breath. Just as his lungs reached capacity, a multitude of tiny points of light popped into existence. At that same moment, he felt the earth let go of him. There was a surge of intense vertigo that was gone almost as soon as it registered on him. There were 3 seconds of weightlessness before the shuttle's own field activated. Lou felt another surge of vertigo, followed by a throb from his sinuses. Damn dust! It blew around so hard down there that it always got into the shuttle somehow, double and triple seals notwithstanding. He popped a decongestant as he steered the shuttle through the junkyard orbiting the planet, and then kicked the course he had laid in over to the autopilot. "So," he said to Kicker, pushing his hat back slightly, "what'd you find down there?" Kicker chuckled. "Oh man, you won't believe it. Call the Grendel. Get the Sarge on the horn, will you?" "That good, huh?" said Lou, reaching for the comm switch. "Oh yeah," Kicker said, his grin broadening. Definitely the canary that got the cat, Lou decided. He just hoped there was enough left of the cat for all the rest of the canaries on this trip, himself included. Sergeant Elijah Gulliver Brodsky surveyed his team of ex-grunts hard at work on the various keep-busy assignments he had given them in the cargo bay, and considered what he could have them do next to keep them all occupied and out of trouble when they had finished up here. He was running seriously short on keep-busy bullshit, and the team was getting restless. Even more to the point, they were on to him with the keep-busy bullshit. He had no illusions about that, and never had. These weren't grunts, after all. They were ex-grunts. Intelligence in the 99th percentile of the 99th percentile. Physical abilities developed and honed in training and in combat to a level that exceeded all previous notions of what was humanly possible. There was no slipping anything past a bunch like this, even if you had the kind of chops good enough not only to put you in command, but keep you there as well. Brodsky had studied the matter of command very carefully, almost from the moment he had been offered the military option. He had been all of 8 years old at the time, already 2 years into the advanced educational track, when the soldiers had come calling, straight to his family, bypassing the usual visit with his teachers at school. His family, a multi-generational collective that would have seemed the antithesis of all things military, had been astounded to find that the quiet young scholar in their midst had as much physical potential as intellectual, and downright flabbergasted when he asked that he be allowed to accept. The family had been quite sharply divided over the matter, but fortunately for Brodsky, his parents had acceded to his wishes, without offering any serious resistance, although they had grilled him thoroughly for several hours first. Well, their version of grilling anyways, which meant they took him on a day-long excursion to Martha's new vineyard, just off the northern Gulf Peninsula, for a lot of quiet, uninterrupted discussion while riding ferry boats. Neither of his parents would have been suited for anything even vaguely resembling the military lifestyle, and could not understand why their son would even want to try it. But they had let him go anyway, and for Brodsky, it had not been leaving home, but going home. None of the ex-grunts under his command had been that young when they had signed up, and he suspected that was a good part of what gave him the edge. Not all of them were lifers either. Sven and Briggs had both announced their intentions not to re-enlist after their respective hitches were up. Sven said he was going into interplanetary banking, of all things, but Briggs seemed to have no definite plans. Brodsky suspected she would end up back in the Corps, for lack of anything she liked better, thus discovering that she really was a lifer after all. But he kept his thoughts to himself, sharing them neither with Briggs or anyone else. If Briggs wanted his advice, she would ask for it. Otherwise, she wouldn't appreciate it, and Brodsky really couldn't blame her. Sven, on the other hand, was a different matter. Brodsky thought he might have been better off petitioning for early release, and he was strongly tempted to tell him. And not simply because the big golden-haired soldier was dogging Gecko again, instead of running a diagnostic on the micro-satellite again. Brodsky wasn't averse to sexual tension among the team members. It kept them alert. But with just under a year left, Sven wasn't quite as focused as he had been. It wasn't enough to be noticeable to the rest of the team yet. He was still a good soldier, and Brodsky knew he could still rely on him. The guy was too intelligent and too well trained to make any seriously stupid mistakes. But Brodsky's own training enabled him to discern the first signs of restlessness in the man. In another month, he was going to start getting moody as well. According to Sven's psych profile, he was at the more emotional end of the mood spectrum, which in turn would make him a disruptive influence despite everyone's best intentions. In Brodsky's opinion, it was better to let the guy go early so he could take his exemplary record with him. Now, as he walked through the cargo bay, he decided he would take it up with Sven as soon as they got back to Solaris, rather than waiting till they made planetfall on Earth 2, as he had originally planned. Best to get it over with as quickly as possible, give him the option of transferring out before the team got another assignment. And from the look of things with Gecko, that would be the best thing not only for the team in general, but for her in particular. Gecko was the newest member, with them only 2 months, and a very good fit right from the get-go. It would be far better for her to adjust if Sven went before she got any more attached to him. Then she would have to invest more of her energy in bonding with another new face than missing good old Sven after he left. Abruptly, a noise like a billion angry metal hornets scraping their stingers on a billion tin cans filled the air. Wincing, Brodsky turned to see Condor sharpening one of the 4 massive drill bits on the mole. Dr. Lowe had made a big deal out of requisitioning that fancy piece of archaeological equipment. They absolutely had to have it. They needed it. There was no point in going on the trip without it. The class was bound to make some sort of find, but how were they supposed to determine whether it was important or not if they couldn't even get it out on the ground? Naturally, Lowe had gotten his way. Lowe always did. Not only had he gotten his way, he had also managed to finagle some kind of grant to pay for it, sparing both himself and the university the rather considerable expense. And now that the trip was just about over, the only dirt the thing had seen since they had taken it aboard was the dust that had collected on it while it sat unused in the cargo bay. And even that was mostly metallic, from periodic keep-busy honings. As a result, it would be going home with drill bits sharper than they would ever need to be. Brodsky made a mental note to tell his team the mole was off limits from now on, if for no other reason than to spare himself from having to hear that grinding noise. Condor was completely unaffected by it, which was why Brodsky usually stuck him with any jobs that involved the sharpening, grinding, or cutting of metal. Condor rarely complained or showed any displeasure about that or anything else for that matter. He had what Brodsky's great-aunt Verushka referred to as a poker face, and that venerable lady knew whereof she spoke, having been extremely capable in that area herself. Until Condor had been transferred into the squad, Brodsky had never thought he would ever meet anyone even half as gifted as his grandfather's sister, but this guy would definitely have impressed her. And considering he was all of 23 years old, he might even have unnerved her to the point where she almost blinked. "Behind you, Sarge," said a gruff voice. Brodsky stepped aside to let Dallas and Briggs push a giant winch hook past him to secure the chain, so it wouldn't be swinging around like a deadly pendulum all the way back to Solaris. "You hear?" Briggs was saying. "Division 4 just entered the occupied zone." Dallas glanced quickly from her to Brodsky and back again. "Casualties?" he asked, his voice tense. Briggs gave a shrug. "Minimal." Dallas frowned, glancing at Brodsky again. "How the hell did we get this screwed-up assignment?" "Amen, bro," Briggs grunted. "I didn't join the Corps just so I could be a frickin' babysitter." Brodsky glared at them, but the expression was purely perfunctory, and both Briggs and Dallas knew it. He couldn't blame them. Hell, he felt the same way himself a lot of the time, but he made it a standing order that they should keep their complaining to a minimum. No matter how justified it was, you couldn't let a team do too much of that shit. It was bad for morale. The communications links in his ear gave a short, gentle buzz. Brodsky tapped the receiver button in the center of the earpiece, grateful to have an excuse to signal Condor to stop what he was doing. "Brodsky here." "Hey, Sarge," Kicker said, coming through on the general channel, so the rest of the team could hear. He sounded more excited than any one of them had in months. "You're never going to believe this. We found a viable down there." "You what?" Brodsky felt his mouth drop open. "Say again." All activity in the cargo bay ceased as the rest of the team turned to look at him. "You heard right, Sarge. We found 2 bodies in deep cryostasis. KM thinks we can resuscitate the female. We're on approach now." There was a faint but clear chuckle from Lou in the background. "Female? Oh, yeah!" Brodsky could see the rest of the team was as astounded as he was, except for Condor, of course, whose expression hadn't changed at all. "Roger that." Brodsky looked around the cargo bay. "Okay, team. You heard the man. Company's coming. Let's get out the welcome mats." "Damn," said Condor, climbing down off the mole as everyone else got busy. "I was hoping we might get to kill something." Brodsky gave a short laugh and opened a separate link to engineering. "Hey, Crutch, you copy?" The only reply from the Grendel's engineer and co-pilot was a long, lazy snore. Crutch had never been one to waste any energy staying awake if it wasn't absolutely necessary. "Crutch," Brodsky said, raising his voice. "Do you read me?" Another snore. "Crutch, goddammit, wake the hell up!" The snore cut off sharply, and a hoarse, throaty voice said, "What'd you want?" Brodsky smiled sourly to himself. "They're on the way back from the surface," he said. "Prepare for docking and power up the labs, will ya?" "Yeah, whatever," Crutch said, speaking through a yawn as he began stirring around. Brodsky decided he would leave the link to the shuttle open. It wasn't absolutely necessary, but he preferred to keep an ear on the shuttle's progress himself. He was responsible not only for his team, but for the security of every person aboard the Grendel, including the flight crew. Not that he was expecting anything to go wrong, especially with Lou at the shuttle's controls and Kicker riding shotgun. But if something did, he would hear it as soon as the guys in the cockpit did, which would give him extra time to react. Even a few seconds could make a difference between survival and disaster. But all he heard now as he got busy with the rest of his team was Lou and Kicker yakking away as they proceeded with the routine docking maneuver. "So, what does she look like?" Lou asked. "Cute," Kicker told him, laughing a little. "Oh, yeah," Lou laughed with him. "Cute and single, eh?" "That's right." Yeah." Lou's laughter turned slightly lascivious, and then trailed off to end in a wistful sigh. "I'm so lonely." Lusting after a frozen female he hadn't even seen, Brodsky rolled his eyes. Lonely wasn't the word for that. The team was assembled at the shuttle bay in plenty of time to meet Professor Lowe's group. Lowe came in first and started to give orders, but Brodsky talked over him. "Kicker, Briggs, you two take the girl. Dallas Gecko, you got the big guy." "We need to get her to the lab now," Lowe said, pointing to the female as she went past them on the stretcher. There was no frost on her anywhere that Brodsky could see, although her body was obviously still very stiff. They were going to have to work fast in the lab. If she thawed out much more, she would definitely spoil. "Can you really bring her back?" Brodsky asked. "Well, we'll find out, Sergeant," Lowe said, and then turned to look at the figure on the other stretcher. Brodsky gaped at it in astonishment. It had to be the ugliest fucking thing anyone had ever brought back from old Earth, at least in Brodsky's experience. It seemed to be shaped like a human, but whether it was actually even humanoid was debatable. To Brodsky, it looked like a hunk of spoiled meat wrapped in rags, with some kind of mask where its face should have been. Maybe it had been a person once, Brodsky thought, but even then, it must have been some kind of seriously abnormal specimen of human, one of nature's more egregious mistakes. "You're not thinking of bringing that thing back, are you?" he asked Lowe, staring after Dallas and Gecko as they carried it away to the other lab. "Hell no," Lowe told him. "Impossible." "Ah, shit." Brodsky turned to see Azrael standing a bit unsteadily just inside the entrance to the shuttle bay, looking more than a little cross-eyed and alarmingly short of body parts. "I forgot my arm." He staggered forward a couple of steps and stopped, swaying a little. Brodsky took in the seal on the stump of his right arm, along with his drunken demeanor, and shook his head. To his knowledge, no one had ever lost a limb on a college field trip. Leave it to Azrael to be the one who managed it. Abruptly, Janessa came in behind him with the wayward arm. "Here it is." She shoved it at him and kept going at him. "Dumbass." Asriel either didn't hear her or didn't care. He held his detached limb with the palm of the hand in front of his face, and then shook it slightly, so that the limp fingers seemed to wave hello to him. "Hi, hand," he said. Maybe he ought to throw the kid over his shoulder and carry him to first aid, Brodsky thought. But then KM was beside him, and they were all heading down the corridor to the main area of the ship. "Any idea how long the woman's been down?" Brodsky asked. 4.5 to 5 centuries, said KM. Damn. Brodsky revised his estimate of how likely it was that she would actually live downward. No one had ever come up after being down longer than 300 and change. "This'll be one hell of a wake-up call. If it works," he added silently. "I'm bitchy as hell when I wake up," Janessa said, to no one in particular, and the universe in general. "Really?" said Cineron as he passed her quickly and trotted to catch up with Brodsky and KM. "Did you just wake up?" Before she could answer, he turned to KM and said, "Once we're in the clear, I'd like to check your circuits." "Oh, I just bet you would," Janessa put in, pushing between them and going on ahead. "It's not like that," Cineron called after her testily. "Here we go." Brodsky suppressed the urge to knock their heads together. They were always taking shots at each other. Neither one would bear to let an opening go by. Brodsky wished they would just go to her room or his and get it over with, and he was pretty sure that the only reason they hadn't already done so was walking beside him. KM seemed to sense his gaze and glanced at him with a faintly questioning expression. She was one hell of a major accomplishment, especially for a student like Cineron who didn't actually have his degree yet. Definitely proof of the kid's superior intelligence, all right. Even more telling to Brodsky's mind, however, was KM's appearance. It was not simply that she was beautiful, but that she was beautiful in an individual way. Like, well, an individual. Any guy who made a sophisticated, knowledgeable matrix unit good enough for field work, but also more beautiful than just about any of the other women in the vicinity, was just begging for trouble, Brodsky thought. The trip had been pretty quiet for the most part, but they weren't home yet. There was still plenty of time for something to blow up, or something to go wrong. Chapter 5. As Adrian Hart hurried along the connecting hallway to the labs in the left pontoon section of the Grendel, she could hear the excited voices of the group that had just returned from the surface of Earth 1. It sounded like they had made an especially exciting find down there. Well, good for them, but she still didn't regret not going. As Professor Lowe's head lab practitioner, she was on her third field trip to Earth 1, and although she was deeply fascinated with the old homeworld and everything about it, she hated going dirt side. Thank God Lowe had stopped insisting that she go along with him to the surface. Being sandblasted by a hurricane was not her idea of fun. Lowe sure seemed to like it, though. Or at least he was getting used to it. But then, she suspected, Lowe didn't mind most kind of rough treatment. Now the professor's voice came to her from farther down the hallway. "Kensa, where are the others?" "Waylander's in Lab 1, replied a young female voice. "He's charging the bed now." "Good. Get Stoney and Adrian into Lab 2. A pause. "And you two, take the big guy and meet them there. The female goes to Lab 1 with me." "Oh, you guys always find the cool shit," Kensa complained. Adrian felt a surge of irritation. Stoney and Kensa in Lab 2 with her? A fat lot of good that was going to accomplish. She couldn't remember the last time she had met anyone as useless as those two. Maybe they really were bright enough to qualify for this course, but she wouldn't have sworn to it in a court of law. The only thing they showed any interest in or aptitude for was now. How did they put it in the late 20th, early 21st century? Getting it on? When she had tried to talk to Lowe about the hyperactive tendencies of certain students, he had told her she had to word her complaints in the vernacular of the time, just like everyone else in the class. No problem for her. After all the hours she had put in with Lowe, she could rattle it off in her sleep. But to put it Lowe's way, what a frickin' pain already. Like the retro clothing he insisted everybody had to wear, herself included. She glanced down at her bare midriff and wondered, not for the first time, if every woman in the early 21st century really ran around with her belly button on display. Knowing Lo, she had her suspicions. "Oh my God," she heard Azrael wail shakily. "My arm's not on my body." Adrian frowned and slowed her pace very slightly. Azrael's arm was not on his body. She had no idea how they could have come about, and she didn't want to, nor did she particularly want to see the situation. She thought, and slowed down a little more, listening to Lo tell Cineron to take him to the smaller repair bed in Lab 1 to get him fixed up. Azrael's wells began to fade as Cineron took him away, and Adrian quickened her pace again. She reached the end of the hallway and almost bumped into Lo as she turned the corner and entered the central area. "Adrian, good," he said, his voice both delighted and urgent at the same time. "I need you in Lab 2. "What's happening?" she asked. "You found something, didn't you? Is it something big?" "2 viables." Grinning, he held up 2 fingers. 2? She had figured it was something major even for Lo, whose luck in finding important artifacts was a lot better than average. But this was far and away bigger than she had imagined. "My God, in what condition?" "Only perfect," he told her smugly. "We're about to attempt reanimation on one of them." "Unbelievable," she said, unable to suppress her excitement. "This is just unbelievable." "Un-freaking believable," Lo put in, by way of correcting her. She gave him a quick nod of acknowledgement. "A walking, talking Earth One ancestor? I've got a million questions." I know, Lo told her, "but you'll have to save them for later. Right now I need you to complete a full endothelic structural scan on the large body." "I'm on it," she said. "Not a problem, sir." "Great. Take point on this one for me," he said as he started towards Lab 1 and then stopped. "And use Kensa and Stoney." Adrian made a pained face. "But they're only second year," she protested. "They'll slow me up." "Just lead them through it step by step," said Lo. "But just take them through it," he said, talking over her firmly. "Log him in properly and place him in stasis. I'll check back with you and go over your findings." He rushed off towards the lab. "Right," Adrian said, looking after him. "My arm!" Azrael's wail echoed faintly through the ship. "Your arm and my ass," Adrian muttered under her breath, and headed for Lab 2. "My arm!" Azrael said as Cineron and Brodsky loaded him onto the bed in the alcove in Lab 1. "It's not on my body, dude." "Relax. It will be." Brodsky chuckled inwardly as he pushed the kid down so that he was lying in the proper position. "It will be. Just give it a few minutes, boy." "Yeah, just lie back, man," Cineron added. "Let the beautiful Nanotech 1000 make your arm as good as new." Blinking in druggy surprise, Azrael looked from Cineron to the stump that ended just a few inches below his shoulder. "My arm," he said, speaking, if for the first time. "My arm, man. It's not on my body, dude." "Don't worry, we gotcha," Cineron said soothingly, still working on the settings. "Now just lie back and don't move, or you'll have an elbow where a wrist should be." He finished with the settings and paused to make sure that both Azrael and his arm were in exactly the right position with respect to each other before he turned the ants loose on Azrael. As repair jobs went, this wasn't particularly complex or time-consuming, and Brodsky knew from his own experience that the process was completely painless. Still, he couldn't help feeling a little anxious for the kid as he watched, lying there on the treatment bed. Azrael looked even younger than he was. Like a little kid, a child. Lo should have been keeping a better eye on him, and Brodsky was tempted to say something about it, for all the good that would do. Lo wasn't the kind of person who listened to anything anyone else had to say. Well, at least the kid would be safe now that he was back on the ship. He could while away the trip back to Earth 2, hunting virtual monsters with Dallas in the cargo bay, where the worst thing that could happen was their having to reboot the game a couple times. Although they had two completely separate entrances, Labs 1 and 2 were actually situated side by side in the Grendel's starboard pontoon. They were partitioned by a wall with a large panel of unbreakable, translucent, soundproof glass, identically equipped with state-of-the-art technology with self-contained power. They could reallocate their respective resources between themselves and draw extra processing capacity from each other, if necessary. Most ships of the Grendel's class were more than adequately equipped, but only the Grendel had full-scale Nanotech 2000 beds in both labs as well as two compact alcove units, with enough juice to run all four at once if necessary, which made it Lowe's vehicle of choice despite its considerable expense. Lowe's status at New Harvard as well as in academia in general meant that expense wasn't supposed to be an issue. Nonetheless, every so often, someone on the university's board of directors would come down with a case of hardening of the purse strings, an ailment characterized by an urgent compulsion to cut New Harvard's budget. Lowe wouldn't have even noticed, much less cared, except for the fact that he was always the first one the afflicted wanted to challenge. There were actually other courses in New Harvard curriculum that were even more expensive, but only Lowe's was open to undergraduates as well as students in advanced degree programs. In terms of undergraduate study, it was the priciest course by far, which was just the sort of thing that caused extreme distress to administrators in the grip of cut-the-budget fever. Being challenged didn't worry Lowe in the slightest. To date, he was undefeated. All he had to do was go to a board meeting and show a few hollows from field trips, maybe hand out copies of some grad student's testimonial, and that was pretty much the end of the matter. Till next time, anyway. Once he had flown in a former student who had become a sensation in the more rarefied area of academia, after developing some kind of method or technique called temporal interpolation. Lowe actually had no idea what the fuck that was, but all the big brains were excited by it. Not to mention all the little brains trying to pass themselves off as big brains. And the student claimed that studying with Lowe had been what had inspired her to explore the whatever it was in the first place. That had been an exceptionally definitive victory for Lowe, although afterwards one of the board members had taken him aside and asked him, very politely, not to show off to such an extent in the future. Magnanimous in victory, Lowe had promised he wouldn't. What a shame he was going to break that promise, he thought, as he watched Waylander, KM, and Janessa moving around the still form of the woman on the table. He really had meant to keep it, but hell, this was the find of the century. What was he supposed to do, leave two cryo subjects to rot, just because they were more exciting and important than anything else discovered on Earth-1 so far? He moved closer to the table where the woman lay. "Where are we?" he asked Waylander a little tensely. Waylander checked the console in front of him. "Board's all green. The N2's warm and ready, Teach." He held up one hand in an OK sign. Lowe nodded at him approvingly. At the moment, he couldn't have cared less whether they kept to the historic period or not. "Good. KM, you've been stabilizing any cellular fractures?" "Yes, Professor." She was already busy at the console directly opposite Waylander, her fingers dancing over the keyboard too fast for the eye to follow. "Janessa." Lowe looked around and saw she was standing at the head of the bed. "Give me a full scan. Glycerol levels, cerebral perfusion, saturation, the works." She wrinkled her nose. The only science Janessa had any interest in at all was biology, and only on a very elementary level. But she obediently turned to the control panel. "I live to serve, Professor." Lowe smiled inwardly. There was a great deal of truth to that statement. "Okay, then. Let's see just what we're dealing with here, folks." "Thaw rate has accelerated," Janessa told him, her tone brisk and businesslike now. "Decrystallization of the membranes is now at 32% and rising." "Good," said Lowe. "Now someone get those clothes off of her." "I got it," Waylander said quickly, moving from his console to the treatment bed. "I got it," Janessa said, grabbing the surgical scissors as Waylander started to reach for them. "Honestly, you'd think you'd never seen a woman before." Waylander blinked at her, mildly offended. "Not a 400-year-old naked one." "Uh-huh," Janessa said, busy with the scissors. "And the difference would be?" "Waylander," Lowe snapped impatiently. Where are her diffusion barriers? 17 and stable, Teach, Waylander told him, a hint of contrition in his voice. He was a good guy and a bright student, but sometimes getting him to concentrate was a chore and a half. Of course, Janessa didn't help. She had changed from her environmental suit into one of her usual sex queen outfits, and the blouse she was wearing was, well, she was barely wearing it. It didn't leave much to the imagination. Lo was having some trouble concentrating himself. Janessa finished cutting the female's clothing off, and then, as if she had caught the flavor of his thoughts, glanced over at him with a small, enigmatic smile. "And she's clear," she said to no one in particular, and covered the still form with the thermal blanket. "Okay," Lo said. "What's next?" Finish removing the vitrified extracellular solution," Waylander guessed. Lo made a face. He hated it when they guessed, especially when they guessed wrong. "That will happen spontaneously, Waylander. You know this." "Introduce metabolic inhibitors into the cytoplasm," Syneron called over from behind him. "Very good," Lo told him. "I knew that," said Janessa. "I knew it too," KM added, somewhat surprised. Lo turned to look at her and saw that she had actually addressed this remark to Syneron. Damn. This was one of the best knowledge matrix units he had ever seen, but if he hadn't known better, he would have thought it was in the process of developing a feedback loop that was showing up as a simulated emotional attachment to her programmer, its programmer. "Yeah, okay," Lo said. "I want everybody to stay positive and keep alert." He glanced back at the alcove where Syneron and Brodsky were hovering around Azrael. "And how is he doing?" "Just a couple more adjustments," said Brodsky, checking one of the overhead readouts, "and he'll be back in business." "Good," Lo said. "Syneron, when you're done there, I need you over here." He turned his attention back to the woman they were trying to reanimate, and caught Janessa giving him a dirty look, as if his asking Syneron to join them meant he was denigrating her ability. Lo smiled a little and shook his head, hoping that would let her know that this was just a matter of making sure Syneron did his share of the lab work. But she stuck her lower lip out at him and turned away, refusing to be placated. No doubt he was going to have to work something out with her in a private student-teacher consultation, which was just fine with him. Brodsky watched as the lines of force that served to indicate the progress and location of the nanomechanisms everyone was referring to as ants began to withdraw from Azrael's arm and flow back into the receptacles on the edge of the bed. They had done a perfect job of reattaching the kid's severed limb, as usual. There was no visible sign of any injury at all, let alone an amputation. "Okay, son, you're damn near good as new," he said as he helped Azrael sit up. The kid looked at him with half-closed eyes and grinned. Good as new, but still high as a kite. He looked around dreamily and spotted the activity in the main part of the lab, just as the woman's face appeared larger than life on the main monitor. "Hey," he said, "who's the grizzle grabber?" That's out of period slang," Syneron said to him. The kid couldn't have cared less. "We brought her back from Earth." "No shit," said Azrael, standing now. Brodsky caught him as he swayed sharply to the left. "Can I have her?" Brodsky and Syneron exchanged amused looks. "Absolutely," Syneron replied. "All right." Azrael rubbed his newly reattached arm and flexed his fingers. He started to take a step, and Brodsky had to catch him again as he swayed hard to the right. "Whoa, still a little dizzy." "Just take it easy," Brodsky said, helping him steady himself. Holding on to him, Azrael moved his shaggy head slowly from side to side, in an effort to clear it. Whacking Brodsky with the clutch of 3-foot dreadlocks he insisted was absolutely authentic, for students his age in the early 21st century. "Yeah, okay," Azrael said, sounding a little more alert, but still very drugged up. But just a little. Brodsky could see that his pupils were still quite dilated. He had a ways to go before he was within shouting distance of sober. "Hey, everybody, I'm going to hit the grid, okay?" He looked around as he waited for a response, his gaze coming back to Brodsky, who nodded at him and mouthed, "Go ahead." Azrael smiled with druggy delight and moved off, staggering only a little as he found his way out of the lab. "That's it, kid," Brodsky thought at him. "Go play somewhere safe, where you can't get hurt." He was definitely going to get up and load shit about this, he decided. Just because the guy was an academic superstar didn't mean he could get careless with the students. Christ, they were all just kids, really. In Lab 2, Adrian looked up from the computer to see Stoney pause on his way in to slap a perfect in-period fight with the now-restored Azrael as they passed in the hallway. "Youch!" Azrael said, tucking his hand under his armpit. Laughing a little, Stoney gave her a conspiratorial smile. Adrian turned her attention back to the computer without acknowledging him. "Specimen 4420 found in Sector 392OL on Earth Prime," she dictated briskly. "Subject discovered in complete cryosuspension. Severe loss in the axoplastic proteins as well as major hemorrhaging in most major organs renders subject invalid for reanimation." "Hey, Adrian, where do you want this?" She looked up at Stoney again. He was holding a data kit in both hands. "Just put it on the specimen table," she told him. "We need to do a full morphological workup on this one. So let's start with the cerebral CTEP scan." Kinsa finished for her, goosing Stoney as he passed without missing a beat. "What?" she added, seeing the mildly surprised expression on Adrian's face. "I did read the same med files you do." Stoney said with lascivious approval. He put down the data kit and slipped both arms around Kinsa. "Smart and sexy." "Initiating scan," Adrian said, not bothering to hide her irritation. There they went, as usual. Those two couldn't seem to go 2 minutes without crawling all over each other. 2 minutes. More like 2 seconds. This was a pretty randy group anyway, but Kinsa and Stoney were the worst. They just wouldn't quit. The large monitor above the table lit up with a graphic of the specimen, which went from 2D to 3D, as information from the scan started coming in. "Weight, 309.7 microns, Adrian noted, impressed. "Big sucker," Stoney said, also impressed. "I bet he's hung like a mammoth," Kinsa added. Adrian rolled her eyes. What a brilliant scientific observation. If male genitalia ever became the accepted laboratory standard of measure, she'd have Kinsa to thank for it. "There's been massive cerebral diminution," Adrian went on over the unmistakable sounds of two people groping each other behind her back. "A great deal more than would be expected in a—" Kinsa squealed faintly. The sound hit Adrian like fingernails on an antique slate, and she turned around. Kinsa and Stoney froze with their hands on some of the more sensitive areas of each other's anatomy, looking surprised and guilty. "Sorry," Kinsa said and cleared her throat. "You were saying cerebral diminution?" She tried a tentative little smile on Adrian, obviously hoping that this would indicate she had really been paying more attention to the subject on the table than to grabbing Stoney's ass. Adrian sighed. "Look, why don't you two just, I don't know, take a break?" "Oh, no," said Stoney, dutiful and concerned, although not so much that he felt the need to let go of Kinsa. "We'll help, really." "Yeah, no problem," Kinsa added quickly, also still with her hands full. "It's okay, guys, I can handle this," Adrian told them firmly but not unkindly. All at once she found her impatience tempered by a certain small amount of fondness. Maybe because in spite of her own dedication and ambition, she could remember a few occasions when she had indulged in a little groping herself, when the teacher wasn't looking, of course. Or maybe because after they got back to Solaris, she was going on vacation, where she would engage in more than a little groping of her own. Or maybe between horny students and Professor Lowe, she was just getting soft in the head. "Go ahead," she prodded. "Take an hour. Come back when you're more focused." Stoney's face lit up. "You mean it?" Kinsa was already pulling him out of the room. "Thanks, Adrian," she said as the door shut behind them. "Don't mention it," Adrian said to the empty room. "Ever. It'll be our little secret. Just the three of us." She turned her attention back to the information coming up on the screen, noting that the specimens seemed to be thawing at a faster rate than expected, but unaware of the repercussions this would have on her immediate future, or lack thereof. Okay, this has been chapters 4 and 5 of Jason X, the novelization of the movie. I'm really enjoying this novel. I can't say one bad thing about it so far. It is following exactly at the same pace of the movie, like the same things are happening. But I do enjoy Brodsky's backstory, the more fleshed out characters. I think we all know what scene's about to play out here with Adrian thawing Jason out on that table. One of the best kills in any of the Jason movies is about to happen in the book. Hopefully in the next upload that'll be the first kill we get. Alright guys, I'll be back tomorrow with some more of Jason X. Until then, this has been your friendly neighborhood 80s slasher librarian saying, thanks for listening and have a great night.